Hi everyone, this is Paul Miller. I'm a senior hydrologist with the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. Thanks for tuning in to our YouTube video of our peak flow forecast webinar. Also, thanks to Greg Smith and Ashley Nielsen in our office who helped to put together this presentation. So we'll just go ahead and get started. We've got lots of good information, and definitely feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments, and we'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll go over the current snow situation throughout the Colorado River Basin and eastern Great Basin areas. We'll also talk about how to find and interpret peak flow information on our website. Then we'll kind of show you the highlights of our peak flow forecast. And then we'll also talk about spring weather impacts and the short-term weather forecasts and what those might mean for peak forecasts into the future. Precipitation to date throughout the Colorado River Basin area has been pretty bleak. We started out the water year very dry. October and November were particularly dry, warm months. December we did have active precip, particularly throughout Utah, northern Arizona, and New Mexico. We thought we were heading for a pretty good year at that point, but things quickly dried out. January and February were pretty dry and warm. Utah recorded its warmest winter on record. Also, the Salt Lake City area also recorded its warmest winter on record. And we just haven't had a great amount of precip this water year. You can see the seasonal precipitation to the right, and you can see throughout the upper Colorado River Basin and the eastern Great Basin regions, mostly below average conditions, slightly average to near normal conditions in the upper Green and Colorado headwater regions. Portions of the San Juan River Basin are near average, but for the most part we're pretty dry. This next slide shows modeled soil moisture in our model. You can see the areas here that we think are the most important for making peak flow forecasts or water supply forecasts kind of colored here throughout this map. And what you can see is how our model sees the soil moisture conditions throughout the region. And so in these areas that are red, like up near the Great Salt Lake and in the eastern Great Basin region, those are areas where our model is seeing dry conditions in the basin. Areas that are the cooler colors, blues and greens, those are above average or near normal soil moisture conditions, at least according to our model. We don't take point observations of soil moisture. We calibrate our model to do this for us. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see very dry conditions throughout the Great Basin region, highlighted in red. Wetter conditions in the upper Green and central Colorado regions, so that's the Colorado headwaters and the upper Green River Basin. And dry conditions in the headwaters of the San Juan River Basin. And these mostly reflect what happened last year. You might recall we had great snow conditions in the northern portions of the upper Colorado River Basin, particularly the Green Colorado River headwaters regions. We had above average stream flow last year. These all contributed to the above average soil moisture conditions we see now. In contrast, very dry conditions last year in the Great Basin region, very dry conditions in the San Juan, and those contribute to the dry soil moisture conditions that we see now in our model. Current snow conditions throughout the basin, we use the SNOTEL network that is run by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS. And you can see on this map that's dated March 6th of 2015 that we have a pretty good distribution of SNOTEL gauges throughout the CBRFC region. You can see portions that are warmer colors. Those are the reds and oranges and yellows. Those typically indicate below average, below median, below normal SNOTEL conditions, or the cooler colors, green, blues, that sort of thing, near normal or above normal snowpack conditions. So throughout the CBRFC area, most areas are at or below normal conditions, and when we say normal, we're typically referring to median snowpack conditions. Some areas in the Great and the Duchesne River basins are among the lowest on record. There are better conditions in the Upper Green and Colorado headwater regions. But because of the way the snowpack is shaping up this year, there's a pretty low chance of exceeding flood levels this year. Snowpack volumes are roughly correlated with flooding conditions, and because we're not seeing these above normal conditions, we don't think we're going to see flows that are too far above average. This is how our model is seeing the snow conditions. We do not use observed snowpack point measurements in our model. What we do is we use the precipitation observations from those gauges, and we allow our model to utilize temperature and freezing level information to accumulate or ablate snowpack throughout our region. But you can view this from our homepage now, and you can see how the model views our snowpack conditions spatially, so that's kind of a nifty thing. Just kind of focusing in on some areas of interest here, I've kind of highlighted portions of the Duchesne River Basin. The King's Cabin Snowtel is currently exhibiting the driest conditions on its record. The Lake Fork Snowtel is looking to be the 7th driest on record. So, typically we have about 30 years worth of data on these snowtel stations. So you could kind of see how those measure up. Looking in the Great Basin, Ben Lomond Trail, the snowtel site up there, is currently the driest on record, and the Little Bear site is currently the 2nd driest on record. So again, very dry conditions throughout the Great Basin and Duchesne River Basin regions. Very low snowpack conditions, some record low snowpack conditions. Just looking at some other areas of interest, if we look over at the Gunnison River Basin, this is looking at the Gunnison near Grand Junction. We're currently forecasting a peak flow of about 8,000 CFS. That's near average. If we look at the snow conditions towards the headwaters of the Gunnison, over there on the eastern portion of the Gunnison River Basin, looking over at Porphyry Creek, we see that we're near normal conditions as far as the snowpack goes, but definitely below last year's nice snowpack conditions. You could see last year about this time we had about 15.5 inches of snow water equivalent. This year we're closer to normal, which is about 13 inches of snow water equivalent. As you head west in the Gunnison River Basin, and this is typically true throughout the Colorado River Basin in general, as you head west you see drier conditions, less snowpack. Over at the Park Reservoir snowtel site, we're much below normal conditions there, much below where we were last year at this time. Kind of looking over at the Yampa River Basin, our forecast for peak flows at Steamboat Springs is about 2,700 CFS. That's just a little bit below average, but well below what we were forecasting last year when we had much better snowpack conditions. You can see the Tower Snowtel site is below normal. Also the Rabbit Ears Snowtel site, we're just slightly below normal as far as snowpack goes in the area. Heading over to the San Juan River Basin, our forecast near Bluff is only forecasted to be 3,000 CFS. That's less than half of the normal peak average that we see in the area. Last year, another dry year, we were about in the same ballpark. We saw about 4,000 CFS as a peak last year. We're only forecasting about 3,000 this year. But you can see, you look at the Upper San Juan Snowtel site, much below average conditions there. The Red Mountain Pass, just near average conditions there. But what I want to draw your attention to is if you look at that green line showing this year's conditions, you can see the impact that the most recent storm had. We had a really great storm system run through the San Juan River Basin here over the last week or so. Really improved conditions in the area, but you can see we were just at such a deficit, so dry to begin this water year, that even with this really great storm that's come through, at best we're only kind of approaching average conditions or normal conditions. So yeah, there's the benefits of one storm there, but we're still below average for the most part throughout the San Juan River Basin. So you've tuned into this webinar and you've gone through and we're showing you all this snow information, and you're like, okay, but what is a peak flow forecast? And to us, when we're making a peak flow forecast, we're making a forecast of the maximum mean daily flow due to snowmelt during the runoff period. And when we reference that runoff period, we're talking about that April through July period. These are probabilistic forecasts. We want to give you a forecast that has a 50% chance of happening, a 90% chance of happening, a 10% chance of happening. We want to provide you with information that you can make informed decisions on what kind of risk you're willing to take, and when you're managing your resources, or if you're just interested in what the hydrology looks like in your area, we want to give you an idea of what kind of spread in the hydrology you might see in your area, given our current conditions, given what we think might happen over the next few months. These are regulated flow forecasts. These are different than our usual unregulated flow forecasts that we make for water supply. So we are accounting for reservoirs and diversions. If we know the operations of the reservoirs, many of our partners and stakeholders, they provide us with information regarding the operations of these reservoirs. We do include those in our forecast. If we don't get that information, we do make assumptions based on past experience and past observational history. We do forecast the magnitudes of the peak, but we do not forecast the timing of the peak. So for us, we're giving you an idea of what that peak flow might be. We are not providing when that peak flow could be, but we'll let you know how to figure that out too later on in this presentation. We typically issue these forecasts about twice a month, starting in March. We typically go through May-ish or June, depending on the flows and that sort of stuff. But we typically make this forecast for about 70 points throughout the basin. At some areas, we also make an instantaneous peak flow forecast. So instead of talking about that mean daily maximum forecast, we also make an instantaneous peak flow forecast, but we only do that at sites where the information provides us with enough good data that we are able to make a good forecast of the instantaneous flow. And so, if you look over to the right, there's a plot of the mean daily flow at the Dolores River Station and the instantaneous flow. And you can see there's a pretty good relationship there between the maximum daily peak flow and the instantaneous peak flow. So this is one of those sites where, based on a forecast of a maximum mean daily flow, we can give you an instantaneous peak flow forecast. Some sites where there's heavy rain, convective rain, where there's possible changes in peaks that can be sudden, that can be large. Those don't typically have a good relationship, so we don't make those kinds of forecasts at those points because we just don't have enough information to make quality forecasts. Here's some links to find our peak flow forecast. You can go to our homepage, cbrfc.noaa.gov, and follow some links that I'll show you in just a second, or you could just bookmark these, and if you want to go to the map or if you want to go to the list, you can just click these and explore on your own. But if you go to the homepage route, there's a few different ways to get to those peak flow forecasts. You can click on the rivers heading near the top of the page of our home page. Again, that's cbrfc.noaa.gov. And you'll come up with a drop-down menu. You can select peak flow map or peak flow list, whatever you're most interested in. Or you can go to the right side of the page and select the peak flow probability option. And when you do that, you're going to come up to a page that's going to have a map of all our forecast points for our peak flows. And you can hover over a point to see information, to get a link to more detailed information regarding the peak flows at a particular point. Right now you're going to see a lot of green dots indicating a low probability of reaching flood flow. When we do have more snowpack, or if we do have more conditions that tend to lend itself to flooding, you'll see more red dots where there's a high probability of reaching flood flow. Right now you're only going to see one yellow dot, and that's the Colorado River near Cameo. That station has about a 10% chance of reaching flood stage. So not a high chance of reaching flood stage, but it is the only point right now that we're forecasting really a chance of reaching flood stage this upcoming runoff period. Now, if maps aren't your thing, we also have a list of peak flows that you can take a look at here. And through that list, you can take a look and select the area that you're most interested in, select the site that you're most interested in. You can get the numeric distribution of forecast at a particular site or area. You can see if an instantaneous peak flow forecast has been made at those sites, if there's any pertinent notes or anything like that. We tried to make this list flexible. So there's a bunch of options at the top. If you want, you just click and see what you would like to see the information that you want to see. So when you click a blue text area, it's going to turn orange. When it's orange, it's on. So orange starts with an O, on starts with an O. That's how I tend to remember it. So if it's orange, it's on, and if the text is blue, it's off. It's not visible. And when you're kind of looking through these options, we're always referencing those mean daily peaks. We're not referencing instantaneous peaks. These options are referencing the mean daily peaks. So keep that in mind when you're checking out our information. When you click through and go to a particular site, you're going to be directed to this pretty nifty graph here that shows lots of information, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it here. This is a plot of the East River at Almont in the Gunnison River Basin. You can see Greg, who is our Gunnison River Basin focal point, has made a forecast here in March, indicated by this green line. You can see his 50th percentile forecast, his 25th and 75th percentile forecast, and also his 10th and 90th percentile forecast. That forecast is kind of highlighted in green over the extent of the forecast period. So in the middle of the month when we update our forecast, and in April and in the middle of April, you can see how these peak flow forecasts are going to evolve throughout time. You'll be able to see if our forecasts are trending upwards or trending downwards. I've also turned on a couple options onto this graph. I turned on the option to show the record year data. So you can see when we had the highest peak flows indicated in kind of the magenta color there. And you can see when we've had our lowest peak flows indicated in kind of the baby blue color there at the bottom. You can also see when we typically peak. So for this particular site, highlighted in the light orange color, you can see we typically peak at this stage, late May, early June is typically when we see the peak at the east at Almont Station. A couple other lines to keep in mind. if a particular site has bank full and flood thresholds defined, you'll see those listed here. The bank full threshold indicated in the orange dashed line, and the flood threshold indicated in the red dashed line. Again, lots of information on these plots. Feel free to click around, play around with them, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. We're always willing to help and answer any questions you might have. So like I mentioned earlier, we do not forecast the time of those peaks. We're just forecasting the magnitude of those peaks. But we do provide you with a way where if the timing of the peaks is important to you, that you can get that information. So every day we're making a daily flow forecast at stations throughout the Colorado River Basin. And as peaks approach, we'll typically take those sites off the list. They'll be on the list, but they'll have a little note next to them that say, hey, this site's going to be peaking soon, or the peak has already occurred at this site. You don't want to look here. You want to look at our real-time daily flow observational gauge. And so this is where you're going to be able to click and kind of get a better feel of when a particular peak is going to happen, what that magnitude is looking like. And this is where you're really going to be watching closely. This is where you can get your more real-time information. We've got information from the USGS gauges being plotted on here as well. So you can see, hey, the RFC says, this is what it's looking like for the next 10 days out. And so I can expect to see my peak about at this time under these conditions. So yeah, you definitely want to take a look at our daily forecast hydrographs as the peak approaches or occurs at a particular site of interest. But again, we'll flag these on that list. When you go and click there and that peak's coming, we're going to flag it on that list, and you're going to be directed to these daily hydrographs. So just to kind of go over the highlights of some of our peak flow forecast. In the Green River Basin, we have the Green River at LaBarge. We're forecasting about 3,600 CFS there. That's just about half of the average of 8,000 CFS that we typically see. Again, last year we had great snowpack conditions in the area. Last year there was a peak flow of about 11,000 CFS, so we're forecasting well below that. Over at Green River, Wyoming, forecasting about 6,000 CFS. That's just about average, just a little bit above, but still below last year's conditions. We just haven't gotten the snow that we got last year. Going over to the Yampa River Basin, over at Steamboat Springs, kind of touched on this earlier, but forecasting about 2,700 CFS, just a little bit below the average of just over 3,000 CFS. The Elk River at Milner, we're forecasting about 3,100 CFS, again below average there as well. Kind of going over to the Colorado River headwaters area, the Eagle River at Gypsum, we're forecasting about 3,200 CFS. That's pretty close to average, but below last year's. Again, last year we had that great snowpack that hasn't repeated itself this year. And the Colorado River at Cameo, we're forecasting about 14,500 CFS to be the most probable. The average is about 17,000 CFS. You might recall this is where I said there's about a 10% chance we could reach flood stage here. These forecasts are for that 50th percentile, or the most probable. Last year we just came in under flood stage there. Again, great snow conditions. About 25,000 CFS is what we saw last year, just under the flood level of 26,000 CFS. Again, kind of hitting up the Eagle River at Gypsum. Oh, I already talked about these. So, sorry about that. Kind of going down to the San Juan River Basin. The Animas at Durango, we're forecasting about 3,200 CFS. pretty close to last year's 4,500 CFS or so that we observed. The San Juan near Bluff, we're forecasting less than half of average, about 3,000 CFS, well below the flood stage of over 33,000 CFS. Last year was another dry year in the San Juan, so you're seeing a comparable forecast right there. Kind of going over to the Duchesne, where I mentioned we had some of the lowest snowpack observations on record. We're only forecasting a peak flow of about 350 CFS at the Duchesne near Tabiona, well below the average of 925 CFS. Pretty comparable to what we saw last year, though. The Yellowstone near Altona, we're forecasting about 600 CFS there. Pretty comparable to what we observed last year. We saw a peak of about 580 CFS. Going over to the Great Basin, looking at the Logan River near Logan, Utah. Again, historically bad snowpack in the area. We're only forecasting a peak of 680 CFS. That's about what we saw last year, just about 770 CFS. Again, it's been dry throughout the Great Basin last year, and it's persisting through this year. The Weber River at Oakley, more towards the northern end of the Great Basin, conditions are slightly better up there. We're forecasting about a peak of 1,200 CFS. A bit below what we saw last year when the Great Basin benefited from some of those storms that were hammering into the Green River Basin last year. So just to summarize, basically average to below average conditions throughout the CBRFC region. Like I mentioned before, the Colorado River at Cameo Station is really the only site where we're thinking we might have a chance of hitting flood stage. We're only thinking about a 10% exceedance chance there. It's important to note that even though it's pretty dry and peak flows aren't looking terribly high, we can have floods in any kind of year. It doesn't matter what the snowpack conditions look like. We can have floods regardless of those snowpack conditions, because spring weather really matters. Starting from now, we could get increased snowpack. We could have warm spring temperatures that make a very quick and efficient runoff. Those could be combined with precip. Those can always enhance runoff. And so it's really important to monitor the daily forecast here. I have an example of one such time where we had similar snowpack conditions, and this is for the Gunnison River Basin over at that East River at Almont Station. And you can see, so what I'm showing here on the right side of your screen is in 2013 and 2012, we had very comparable, nearly identical snow conditions heading into late March. So, intuitively we might think, hey, we were going to get about the same kind of flows, but that's not what happened. So we had similar snow conditions into late March, but what happened? Well, in 2012 we had much above average temperature conditions, and in 2013 we had near to below average temperature conditions. And so when we look at the snowpack over the area, in 2012 when we had those warm conditions, we didn't retain our snowpack in the mountainous areas. Much of that snowpack melted away. We didn't continue to accumulate any snowpack. But in 2013, we had below average temperature conditions. We still had some storm events that came through. So not only did we not melt any snow, but we actually accumulated snow in 2013. So in 2013, we retained and added to that snowpack, even though conditions up to that point had been nearly identical. So how did that affect the flows at Almont? Well, along the East River here, you can look in the bottom right corner of your screen. And in 2013, when we had those cooler temperatures, we continued to accumulate snow. We had much, much higher flows in the area that lasted much, much longer. So basically from May through June, we had flows on the order of 1,100 CFS going through the East River at Almont, just because cooler temperatures and continued snowpack accumulation. In 2012, when we had those warmer temperatures and didn't continue to accumulate snowpack, we peaked out at just over 500 CFS, and those flows basically dissipated by the beginning of June. So again, just because we have poor conditions right now, snowpack wise, doesn't mean we can't have high flows, doesn't mean we can't have floods. So be careful, be mindful of that. It's an important thing. So just looking at the upcoming weather, we've got a low pressure system out in the the northern Pacific, just off the coast of California, that's going to be making its way towards us. So we should be getting windy, warm conditions tonight and early tomorrow, but we do think that it's going to bring some precipitation to the area Wednesday through Thursday. But we're not expecting a lot of precipitation. This plot from the Hydrologic Prediction Center, you can see over our area, we're not expecting to see much more than half an inch of precip throughout the area with this upcoming storm. Afterwards, we kind of expect to fall back into that pattern of the high pressure ridge off the western coast of the United States that has been really pushing moisture away from us and really hammering the eastern half of the United States with all that snow and cold temperatures that I'm sure you have seen in the news. But for us, light amounts of precip, windy, warm-ish conditions. We're not expecting this storm to really contribute a whole lot. Looking at the next 3 months, the Climate Prediction Center and the rest of NOAA, we have declared that it's a weak El Nino out there going on right now. So that is taken into consideration with these 3-month climate outlooks. Again, it's a really weak El Nino. We typically don't see a lot of correlation in our area except for in southern Arizona, and typically that's more associated with winter rains and that sort of stuff. But the Climate Prediction Center is showing enhanced chances for above normal precipitation throughout our area over the next 3 months, and also warmer conditions, basically a chance for above normal temperature conditions throughout the western half of the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. So just to give you an update, we update our peak flow forecasts about twice a month, usually about the same time we issue the water supply forecast. We'll probably do that through early May or as needed, depending on the peak flow situation. Just to give you a heads up of our upcoming webinar schedule, we'll have 2 more water supply webinars on April 7th and May 7th, both at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. You can sign up for those through our website, or get a hold of one of us and we'll sign you up for you. And we're also going to have another peak flow webinar in April. We'll schedule that, and we'll let you all know when that's going to happen as well. Hey, feel free to contact us. Michelle Stokes is our hydrologist in charge. Brenda Alcorn, she's our Colorado Headwaters Basin focal point. Greg Smith looks over the San Juan and the Gunnison River Basin. Ashley Nielsen takes care of the Green River Basin. Tracy Cox over the Lower Colorado River Basin. And myself, Paul Miller, I look over the Great Basin forecast. So all our emails are up there. Feel free to email us or call our office. Contact any of us. We're all more than willing to help. And also socialize with us. You can tweet us or Facebook us. We post all kinds of interesting information. The link to this recording is probably going to be on those. So yeah, like us, tweet us, hashtag us. We'll take it all. So Anyways, again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. I'll back up one more slide here so you have our contact information. Feel free to call our office, area code 801-524-5130, and we'll get you in touch with somebody. Hey, thanks a lot for checking out our webinar, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.